effects of the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. Pipelines are laid out across long distances to help transport things like oil and natural gas. They can be effective for moving large amounts of fossil fuels, but can be very harmful to the environment and to people in the area if something like a leak were to happen. There are around 2.4 million miles of pipelines in the U.S. One very significant pipeline is the Dakota Access Pipeline, or the DAPL. The DAPL runs from Stanley, North Dakota to Patoka, Illinois. Much controversy appeared surrounding the DAPL during construction in 2016, as it was intended to be built directly through sacred archaeological sites belonging to the Sioux people. People quickly began to protest the DAPL. The main cause of these protests were the potential threat to the surrounding environment, as well as the disregarding the wishes of the Sioux people. The protests at the DAPL made more people aware of the issues of pipelines and inspired even more protests and changes.
The Dakota Access Pipeline protest has influenced many Indigenous people who the pipeline industry has taken advantage of over the years, including Enbridge Line 3 pipeline. The Enbridge Line 3 pipeline runs from Alberta, Canada to Superior, Wisconsin, which happens to be a direct path through the untouched wetlands and the treaty territory of the Anishinaabes peoples. They rely on this land not only for their water supply, but they also use it for farming wild rice, which is a centerpiece of their culture. Stop Line 3 is an organized nonviolent protest against Enbridge Energy. Starting in March of 2021, about 20 people began their fight where they locked themselves to fences and equipment on their construction sites. These protests are still happening today, as the most recent one being October 29, 2021. These protests vary in events from local home gatherings to protests at our capital.
In Michigan, an oil pipeline continued operating despite a shutdown demand from Michigan Governor Gretchen. The governor ordered Line 5 to be closed on November 2021 because of the potential for a spill in a channel linking two of the Great Lakes. As her May 12 deadline arrived, Canadian pipeline company Enbridge said only the federal government has regulatory authorities over its operation. The protesters accused the company of flouting the law and endangering the world's largest freshwater system. Canada has invoked the 1977 Transit Pipelines Treaty between Ottawa and Washington and said that Line 5 is entitled to run as per this treaty. In a recent development, protesters entered the Enbridge property and forced the shutdown of Line 5. Speaking about the protest, a masked man said, "Line 5 poses an immediate threat to our lives, and these actions are taken out of necessity and self-defense." In this side, protesters sit outside the White House and chant "Stop the 5," referring to the Line 5 protest.
In Cushing, Oklahoma, shortly after the Dakota Access Pipeline protests in 2016, a group of environmentalists and indigenous people from that area decided to openly protest against the construction of the Diamond Pipeline, which was an oil pipeline that carried oil from Cushing, Oklahoma to Memphis, Tennessee. They decided to protest the construction of the pipeline because it would run through the burial grounds and sacred sites of several indigenous groups. These demonstrations are great examples of protests that were inspired by the bravery of the activists at the Dakota Access Pipeline. These demonstrations have made strides for the protection of the indigenous community and will pave the way for future indigenous tribes.